Hi, welcome, Andrea. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. I'm scrolling through the participants list and seeing all the names, and it's lovely to see you. I'm zooming in from California in the United States.
Yeah, probably lots of names it's hard to pronounce. No, how to pronounce the names. Um, yeah, so I want to welcome everyone again, those who just joined, and also those who might watch this recording at a later time. And so, as I just mentioned, this evening is going to be in English because we have Andrea Fella here to guide us this evening to teach us. So at 30 now, we're very excited about having Andrea here. And so I want to thank you, Andrea, for being here. And I personally am very excited because I met Andrea in 2017, and since then she's basically been one of my main teachers, and it's a very dear spot in my heart. So I really appreciate the that we get to have her on the 30 Now platform as well. And so I want to introduce Andrea. Um, Andrea started practicing in 1996, and she did a lot of intensive practice, both in the US as well as in Asia, in Myanmar. And she was also ordained as a nun for a period of time in Asia. And I think it's okay to say that one of the teachers that was most influential in her practice was Sayadaw U Tejaniya, who is a Burmese monk. And he's also one of my teachers. I also practiced with him. And he has lovely teachings also around daily life practice. And that's also what Andrea's teachings are geared towards, this integration of meditation into daily life. And she has very practical teachings. And she teaches, she's a go guiding teacher of the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California, and an Insight Retreat Center also in California, together with Gil Fronsdal. And that's the organization basically behind Audio Dharma, the where we find the audio files, the Dharma talks and stuff that lots of you are probably familiar with. She also teaches at IMS, the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts, and Spirit Rock in California. And yeah, really happy that you're here. Thank you. And you can take it from here.
Okay. Thank you, Marjolein. It's lovely to be here with you. It's morning here in California, and I'm seeing it's evening for many of you, if not most of you. So our energies may be a little different. But let's just start. Let's go ahead and start with a guided meditation. That's what Marjolein told me is the usual here. So yeah, let's start just settling in together. I'll do a little bit of a guided at the beginning, particularly. So at the beginning of a sitting, it's often helpful to just check in. How are you in this moment? Kind of like asking, as if you were a dear friend, asking a dear friend, how are you? And really meaning it. Just how are you? Can you be with yourself in this moment and just kind of take in, connect with how you actually are in this moment? And however you are, that's okay. And in terms of settling into meditation, it can be useful to explore the possibility of relaxation. Having taken in how you are in this moment, you may have noticed some tension or tightness or tiredness or something for yourself, something up for yourself. And with that, holding that, can there be some relaxation around it or with it? Can be useful to relax the body and maybe even consciously relaxing the body. Scanning through the body, maybe relaxing the head and face, particularly the face. The face often expresses or holds tightness when the mind is tight. And if the face can relax, it can support a relaxation of the mind. And so maybe the head, the face, the neck can relax. The shoulders, arms and hands, perhaps they can relax. Chest and upper back. All those muscles around the rib cage that may hold the breathing in, maybe those too can relax. Sometimes I find a deeper breath in that moment can help to stretch those muscles, relax those muscles. Maybe there can be a relaxation across the stomach and abdomen, middle and lower back, the hips, the legs, the feet. And then there can also be a attuning to, a connecting with the core of the body, inside the body. There can be perhaps some relaxation inside the throat. Maybe the heart, the area around the heart can soften and relax. Maybe the stomach and the intestines, all of those organs inside the body, maybe they can relax. And perhaps too, there can be a softening or a relaxation of mind, a letting go of worries, concerns about the day, about the past, worries or concerns about anything upcoming in the future. And even any concerns about now. Maybe the mind can, for this time, set aside and just connect with how you are right now. Allowing the attention to settle naturally, rest with your experience in the present moment. Again, that question, how are you right now? For some of you, this settling and connecting with the present moment may be supported by attending to the breath, turning the attention and just connecting with that rhythm or flow of sensation of the breathing. For some of you, depending on your circumstances or your environment, it may feel more natural to connect with the auditory field, the field of hearing, the sounds in the room, the sound of my voice. And for some of you, it may feel more natural to simply connect with however your experience is changing, sometimes with the breath, sometimes with other body sensations, sometimes with feelings or moods, emotions, sometimes with thoughts. The important aspect here is to know that you are aware. Aware of breathing, aware of hearing, or aware of changing experience. Resting with, settling with your experience in a way that feels natural and easeful for you in this moment. At some point in this period of time, you will very likely notice that the mind has wandered, that you've been lost in thought. In that moment, when you notice that you've been lost in thought, it's an important moment in meditation. It's the moment at which you actually have become mindful again, aware again, after having been lost in thought. In that moment of noticing, I've been lost in thought, you are no longer lost in thought. There's that recognition, awareness of thinking is happening, perhaps, is what you've become aware of. So that moment of recognizing that you have been lost in thought, in that moment, noticing what you are aware of right then. It may be the thoughts that are kind of predominant, the thoughts that are obvious. It may be an emotion or a mood that has been constructed or conditioned based on those thoughts. In that moment, notice how you are. That's the first piece again, that question, how am I? Having noticed that I've been lost in thought. Opening to that, kind of the landscape or the field in which awareness has returned. And another important thing that can be recognized in that moment is the awareness itself. You have become aware again, where moments before mindfulness awareness was not happening. So one of the key things that can be noticed in that moment is that you have become aware. What is that like? What is it like when mindfulness returns? Can kind of feel sometimes like the light has come on in the room. There's a sense of being able to know what's here. Just take in that moment, when you notice that you've been lost in thought, take some moments to take in awareness again, aware again. And what awareness is knowing in that moment. There's no need to judge yourself for having been lost in thought. And that very activity of judgment can kind of obscure this recognition of awareness returning. It doesn't matter how many times your mind wanders during a period of meditation. Each time the mindfulness returns is an opportunity to notice, aware again. This is what awareness feels like. And once you have reconnected with being aware, returning to whatever feels most supportive for you to stay connected with being aware. Whether that is connecting with the breath, body sensations, sounds, or perhaps the flow of changing experience in the present moment. Keeping the practice simple. Connecting to your present moment experience. In a way that feels easeful for you. in those moments that you realize that you have been thinking and lost in thought, can there be an interest in what it feels like for awareness, mindfulness to be back? And just open to what is actually already happening in that moment. Taking a few moments before a kind of automatic returning, what we think of as returning to our practice. Simply reconnecting with awareness and knowing what awareness is recognizing. That is practice in that moment. So you may have a little more settledness than you had initially. I hope that that was supportive for your practice. The topic this evening for you, this evening from this morning for me, is to be curious about, to explore, to talk about exploring the possibility of exploring awareness itself, the comings and goings of mindfulness. It's a common experience in our meditation for us to sit down, to have the intention to be present. And then after a few breaths or a few moments, we'll notice that we're lost in thought. Sometimes we say the mind wandered in that moment. The mind didn't actually go anywhere. What happened in that moment was mindfulness went away. The mind continued doing things, thinking, feeling, but the mindfulness went away. And so the return of mindfulness, what we say, I'm back, or not lost in thought anymore, but that is the arising of mindfulness. If we can get curious about or investigate this process of the comings and goings of mindfulness, rather than thinking about it as a problem that the mind wandered, I'm supposed to be mindful, I'm supposed to be in control of that. Well, this actually is it's a teaching for us. It's a direct experience, a direct recognition that our minds are not really under our absolute control. We cannot sit down and say, I'm going to stay mindful for the entire meditation period. Habits, thoughts, things that we get hooked to happen, and mindfulness gets lost. That's not a failing of our minds. That is kind of the nature of our minds. It's a pointer to also the not self nature of our minds, the anatta nature of our minds. When you sat down to meditate, there might have been a sense of self of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to practice. And then the mind wandered. You probably didn't decide, I'm going to start thinking now. It just happened. That is evidence for, maybe we could say a symptom of the truth that our minds are not self. Because it just happened. We didn't decide to do that. And amazing, again, the return of mindfulness. Sometimes we take credit for it. It's like, oh, I'm back, I'm doing this again. But how did that happen? The mind was wandering and mindfulness simply arose. So this very simple thing that happens to us all the time in meditation is a pointer to, it's a teaching about. It points out to us that our minds are not self. And yet we can take an interest in this, the comings and goings of mindfulness, and the curiosity about that will support us recognizing, in particular, the return of mindfulness more and more, and can also help us to become attuned to when mindfulness starts to weaken and slip out. And because mindfulness is a wholesome quality of mind when used in this way to be curious about experience, the recognition of it when we become aware and notice, oh, this is what awareness feels like. the very recognition of it supports its arising more in the future. And so it nourishes it and nurtures the mindfulness to notice the comings and goings of mindfulness. This kind of exploration around what we normally think of as the wandering mind. We're basically talking about exploring the edges of the wandering mind here, to notice when it returns and when it begins to weaken and fall apart. And so to kind of get curious about that, to be interested in what happens, when does the mind begin to wander? What does it feel like when the mindfulness returns? As we get curious about that, rather than judging ourselves for the fact that it did get lost, it can really shift our relationship to that moment that mindfulness returns. I found for myself, as soon as I started kind of being curious about, well, what is the difference between being aware and not being aware? That moment that mindfulness returns is a key moment to begin to feel exactly what awareness feels like. And as I got curious about that, it really began to diminish the judgment that was very commonly arising around that moment. Very often when our minds wander and we notice that our minds have wandered, we judge ourselves. Like, I got lost again. I did that. But again, that just happened. We didn't do it. It was conditions. It was the nature of the mind in that moment. And so to get curious about the moment of it returning can really support a weakening of the judgment around that moment. As I said in the guided meditation, it doesn't matter how many times your mind wanders. Every time it returns is an opportunity to get more and more familiar with that experience, the experience of awareness itself. So I use awareness and mindfulness synonymously, just to make that clear. What does it mean to be aware? What does it mean to be mindful? Simple definition might be a kind of a knowing what's happening while it's happening, being with experience, a sense of presence, the capacity to know that we know. It's a very natural, simple human capacity to know that we know. That kind of self-reflective capacity. Right mindfulness or wise mindfulness is directing that capacity towards an interest in the experience in the present moment, to notice something as something happening in the present moment. Mindfulness can be used in different ways. And so, it can be that we are aware in the present moment. Just imagine, I use this analogy often, what somebody might be like, a thief might be like in a home that they've broken into. They might be very aware of all their movements, of their actions, to be as quiet as they can while they are in the process of stealing things from this home. Their purpose in being aware isn't to notice what it's like to be reaching and touching, to notice what it's like to be stepping. It's to be aware in order to not get caught and to be able to take these things away. So that is the motivation connected with kind of the reason why we are mindful. And that's what makes wise mindfulness or right mindfulness wise or right. It's a wise attitude, a wise intention connected with mindfulness. And the simplicity of that it's useful to be aware of experience as experience in the present moment, that is wisdom, sounds kind of interesting. It's maybe hard to quite see that as wisdom. But it opens us to the wisdom of recognizing experience in the present moment. This is the wisdom of the Buddha that pointed to the impermanent, unreliable, not self nature of experience. And this kind of awareness, the kind of recognition of this is what's happening in the present moment. This is how it feels for this to be happening in the present moment. These understandings of impermanent, anicca, unreliable, dukkha, and not self, anatta, begin to become clear to us. And as those become clear, the mind starts to understand how and why it struggles and suffers. When we take things to be permanent, reliable, and self, that I have a sense of, that I have a control over things, we orient to things in terms of having and getting and holding on to, which is where our suffering happens. And so this very simple kind of mindfulness, this recognition of this is what's happening in the present moment. This is why it's valuable. So we are interested in human experience as human experience. So to begin to recognize this quality of mindfulness, we can kind of talk about, to come back to the looking at the edges of mindfulness, of the comings and goings of mindfulness. The easiest place to begin to get curious about that is when mindfulness returns. When we've been lost in thought and mindfulness comes back, that moment, mindfulness is connecting with experience again, even if it's just in the understanding or the sense of, I have been thinking. That moment, that recognition, I have been thinking. We are again aware of what's happening in the present moment. And so in that moment, there is a kind of recognition, if we notice it just as it happens. As I said, often we judge ourselves in that moment, but if we notice just as that moment returns, awareness is returned. Awareness is back. There's a kind of a lingering recognition or a lingering memory, let's say, of what it was like a moment or two before, when the mind was not connected with experience. And there's the direct sense right now in this moment of what it is like to have awareness connected to experience. So there's a kind of a sense of the difference of what it was like to not have been mindful and to now be mindful. So that kind of interest or curiosity, what is it like to be mindful now? That begins to give us a flavor or a taste of the experience of being mindful, the experience of awareness itself. This is really useful, not only in our meditation practice. It's incredibly useful in our meditation practice. It can be a place where we begin to recognize that difference and to let go of the judgment around the wandering mind, around the mind that gets caught into thoughts. But it also is something that we can notice all through our day. That kind of momentary arising of mindfulness, becoming aware in the moment of being present wherever you are, that happens way more during our day than we actually consciously recognize. Because what happens in that moment often is that almost as soon as we become aware of something, like maybe we're in our kitchen and we see something like on the floor. Well, that has it kind of brings us into awareness. Oh, there's something on the floor. I need to do something about it. But we so quickly shift to the doing something about it that often the kind of the sense or the recognition of, I have become aware that there's something on the floor. That sense of the awareness arising gets lost because we immediately jump on what we have become aware of and start doing something with it. And so if we can be curious about this moment, this is something I sometimes suggest. I teach these non-residential retreats, a daily life practice kind of retreat from time to time. And this is something I often really suggest to people. Just see if you can start noticing that moment in your daily life when mindfulness returns. And again, you don't have to do a lot with it. Just recognize, oh, I've become aware. Awareness is here looking at the floor of my kitchen. What is it like for awareness to have returned? What does that feel like? And then just get on with your day. There may be a lingering experience of the mindfulness in that moment, but you have connected with the experience of mindfulness. It may last for a little while, but just get on with your day and keep doing what you've been doing, and just recommitting to, recognizing when those moments happen. As you start to notice them or recognize them, they'll start to point themselves out to you more often, actually. And you'll start to see how often they do happen. You're walking across a street and mindfulness returns. You're reaching for a glass and mindfulness returns. It happens a lot. And this kind of practice is a daily life practice, can begin to weave a thread of awareness throughout our day. And again, just this recognition or this kind of awareness of a kind of mindfulness that notices experience as human experience. It is a wholesome mindfulness that begins to help us recognize the impermanent nature of experience, the not self nature of experience. Every time we notice mindfulness returning, it's a pointing out of not self. So we sometimes call this kind of mindfulness unprompted mindfulness, the mindfulness that's returning in this way. Unprompted mindfulness. It simply arises. When mindfulness is here, we can use that mindfulness to prompt, to remind ourselves, okay, I'm aware. Let's reconnect. Let's see if we can be aware of the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. That we could call prompted mindfulness. So this unprompted mindfulness, another wonderful piece about that moment of unprompted mindfulness is that it didn't take any work on your part to make it happen. Prompted mindfulness does take some effort. It's actually a lot less effort than we think it needs to take to just in the moment say, can I notice this next moment? We tend to hold on and try to pick up a lot more moments ahead of us, like I'm going to be mindful for the next 10 minutes or something. But just to be mindful for this next moment doesn't take that much effort, but it does take some effort. This moment of mindfulness arising, it was like a free gift. It just happened. You didn't have to make any effort to do it. And there's also a kind of way that you can touch into, in that moment when mindfulness returns, how effortless it can be to be aware. It's a natural quality of our minds to be aware. And it doesn't take that much effort. And so that's another thing that we can really tune into in that moment of mindfulness returning, that we didn't have to work to make it happen. And then there's the other side. I'll just talk about this a little bit. We can begin to notice or get curious about where mindfulness gets lost. That can be a little more challenging. We can actually begin to notice as we get familiar with what it's like to be aware, as we get familiar with that experience, we can begin to notice it get a little wobbly or get a little weaker. And so then in those moments when we feel our minds kind of start to lose connection, we can bring a little bit more prompting, a little bit more effort into connecting and being present. But at first, we often just get quickly hooked. It happens so fast. A thought arises, a sound arises. We think about that sound. We wonder what it is. We launch off into thoughts so quickly that we don't really notice a weakening of mindfulness. And so what can be useful is to begin to get familiar, to kind of take inventory. And you can do this, maybe from time to time or just at the end of a day, maybe kind of be curious about where is it that you lose mindfulness? In a sitting meditation, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but in a sitting meditation, there may be particular habits of mind or particular thoughts that tend to catch us. In daily life, it can be useful to kind of be curious about where is it in daily life that I tend to get really lost? Is it when I'm talking to someone about a charged emotion? Is it when I go to the grocery store? Is it when I leave the house? Is it when I do some exercise? So kind of taking inventory to be curious about where is it? Where are the places in your day where you do tend to lose mindfulness? And perhaps places where it might be possible. I mean, it is possible to be mindful in all circumstances. It's possible. It's not easy. But you might be curious about those places where you lose mindfulness, where it might be a little more possible for you to be mindful. So a little more easy for you to be mindful, maybe I should say. So for instance, when you're preparing a meal, this is actually one of my favorite places to practice in meal preparation. I notice the quiet little sounds that are made by my body and, by the tools that I'm using, the chopping on the board, the physicality. There's a lot. It can be very easeful to be there. And I don't need to be thinking about something other than the food preparation. And so that can be a place or a time that there can be a little more interest in staying present. And so if you take a kind of an inventory about where you tend to lose mindfulness, if you notice you tend to lose mindfulness in places where it should technically be okay or easy to be present, like going to the grocery store or, taking a walk outside. If you notice that you tend to lose mindfulness in those areas, then you can kind of be curious as you notice that you're heading into those activities. You might recognize, okay, well, I'm aware now and I'm getting ready to make my dinner. So let's see what happens. What is it that happens as I head into making dinner? Where is it that I get caught? Maybe I start and I'm aware. But what is it that happens? What arises that catches the mind and takes it out? And you probably will only notice that after you've returned. And so that's another thing that can be interesting to check into in the moment of returning, is what is it that, so if you've been kind of tracking or aware, okay, I'm in my kitchen and I'm preparing this meal and aware of the sounds and aware of things. And then, 3 minutes later, I am realizing or recognizing, waking up, having been lost in thought. And I might recognize that, the vegetable I was cutting, it triggered a thought about somebody, and I started thinking about them, so that the mind had gotten caught in that. And maybe it was somebody that I was angry with. And so it was, that pattern around anger that had really pulled me out. So that's a learning. It's not that we have to judge ourselves for that. We're beginning to learn something about our minds. What do we get hooked to? What do we, where do our minds get caught? So I'd like to encourage in this exploration of noticing those areas where mindfulness gets lost, to see if you can explore, like maybe you notice that going to the grocery store, that you tend to just get into your shopping and getting it done. And so the next time you go to the grocery store, you could, put some reminders around, you know, where your bags are that you pick them up or something. Put something that will help you to remember to kind of track mindfulness, but to not try to hold on to it, but to be curious rather, what is it that hooks the mind when you go to the grocery store? Is it, something comes up in your mind? It's almost always something that comes up in your mind. It might be something that comes up in your mind around a dinner party that you're planning and concerns about how it's going to go. That's the reason you're going shopping or something like that. So there's something that comes up that the mind has gotten hooked to, or maybe something that you've seen happening in the store. A mother with a child having a struggle, maybe the mind got pulled into that. So, to just be curious about what's happening. So rather than trying to hold the mind into mindfulness, get curious about where it begins to get hooked. This will begin to help you to be present with those things, to be present with maybe the emotions or feelings around seeing a mother struggling with her child, or begin to be present around the worries or concerns about the dinner party, to be with them, rather than to say, well, what I'm doing now is grocery shopping, I should be present for that. What's arising now is something that's happened in connection with what you're doing. Can you be with that? Can you notice that? So getting curious where and how you lose awareness. There's a lot I could say about that, but it's getting to be the end of the time for the talk, and I do want to move in to have time for questions. So mostly I want to encourage a curiosity around awareness, a curiosity about when it comes back, what it feels like for it to come back, what it feels like to have the experience of being aware, and what is it that catches the mind? Can we be aware as we notice those things that tend to catch the mind? If we notice that we tend to get caught by anger, for instance, or impatience. At one point, I did this practice after I noticed how much I got caught by impatience. I kind of, decided to attune to when impatience arose in my life. It's like, okay, that's going to be my daily life mindfulness practice for this next stretch. I'm going to notice impatience arising. I knew I was impatient about some of the bigger things, about the next thing that I needed to do, about, something big that was coming up, impatient around, the transitions. I really began to notice that. But what I became shocked by was just how much impatience arose. I was impatient when I was brushing my teeth. I was impatient when I was opening a drawer in my kitchen. It was just little flashes of impatience happening all over the place. And I was able to notice them and not get hooked by them, believe them. It's just like, wow, this is amazing how much the habit of impatience is operating in this mind. And again, it's not self, it's conditioned, it's the mind doing its thing. And yet, as we become aware of it, impatience being a hooked or, unpleasant, tense clinging in the mind. Impatience is related to clinging in the mind. And so awareness of that begins to help the mind to let it go. And that's what I discovered over the course of exploring that. So as we begin to be curious about where we get hooked, we begin to get more familiar with it. And the mindfulness of it has the capacity to help us to let go, to support the mind to no longer get so hooked by that. So yeah, let's have some time for questions. And you're welcome to type things into the chat. Thank you. I'm happy. It seems useful to Maud. Thank you. I'm fine if the questions relate to the talk or to the guided meditation. Anything about either meditation or daily life practice. Okay, so a question from Laura. For me, the nighttime, lying awake at night, is a situation of low mindfulness. I find it hard to stay present. So this, I think, you mean in bed at night, in a place of, maybe trying to fall asleep. I would just encourage, those places are times where it feels like mindfulness is low or weak, a low energy time, especially since you're trying to fall asleep often in that situation. Not trying too hard, but kind of just opening to what does it feel like to be here lying awake at night. Not so she's like, what is obvious in that moment? Maybe it's the feeling in the bed, just of like resting. Maybe it's stuff going on in your mind. I mean, if lying awake at night, sometimes there's things going on in the mind, being caught by something. And so, you may want to try to consciously, something that I found useful lying awake at night. If my mind was caught by something and it felt like it couldn't put it down, I would, sometimes I would need to make a note about it, because what I found often is that the mind was like thinking it was going to forget this thing. It needed to remember something. So, I keep a notepad by my bed so that I can actually write, and I can write in the dark. Actually, I just, make a few scribbles, and I, make a note about that thing. Another thing that I'll use is, if I find the mind is kind of, it's really nibbling at that topic, like I've really got to figure something out. This is a problem. I need to figure it out. I make an appointment with myself. I say, this is not the time to work on this. I'm going to think about this. I have time tomorrow. I got a full morning, but I've got time tomorrow right after lunch. So I'm going to think about this after lunch. And so I kind of make an appointment with myself. 1 o'clock tomorrow, I'm going to think about this. And then you have to keep your appointment with yourself. Actually take the time to sit down and think about that thing at that time. Because if you don't, if you blow it off, then your mind will, the next night that this happens, your mind's going to know, yeah, you didn't do this last time, so we're going to think about it now. So just kind of set it, you might be able to set it aside in that way. But if it is just that you're awake and, kind of like, there's so many different reasons why we might lie awake at night, and there's not, not a lot of detail there. But, sometimes I find that low mindfulness, and this can happen at many times of the day, times of low mindfulness, what we're often trying to do is to notice something that is, kind of like we're directing our minds. We think that what being mindful means is choosing to pay attention to something like our breath. as opposed to resting and noticing what mindfulness can naturally and easily connect with. So this connects actually to a question that was just sent to the panelists. It sounds very tiring to be noticing all the time. How can you do this in a relaxed way? And I'll touch into that a little bit more. But the awareness itself, as I pointed to, the moment of mindfulness returning does not take that much effort. In fact, the return of mindfulness is effortless. So the awareness itself doesn't actually take that much effort. What takes effort is the trying to stay connected and often the directing of the attention. And so in that place of lying at night or when there's low energy, sometimes the experience of low energy or sleepiness or spaciness, just that quality, we can just connect with that quality itself. I have had experiences. One experience I'll describe. I think sometimes it's easier to hear the kind of whole arc of an experience. I was having breakfast in the morning, and my mind, I was present with the eating and being aware, and the mind kept wandering. It kept kind of spacing out. And when I'd noticed the spacing out, I would bring it back, kind of do that kind of bring back to eating and noticing, what's happening. So there was a doing to the mindfulness when I brought it back. At some point, it kept happening. It happened over and over again that the mind went into this spacing out experience. And at some point, I kind of noticed as it was kind of going into spacing out, and it's like, okay, well, I'm aware. So let's just see, can the mindfulness stay with spacing out? And it can. And I watched it just hover in this spacing out space. And what I felt in that moment was, wow, the mind is really tired right now. It's kind of exhausted. And I'm trying to make it do things. And it's telling me basically, relax, rest. And I wasn't giving it that opportunity. And so when I noticed this, it's just like, oh, this is what it feels like. It's like the mind just felt like it was kind of buzzy and, broad and hovering kind of up above my head somewhere. It's just like, that's what the experience was of spaciness. We think sometimes something like spaciness or low energy or sleepiness is inherently a non-mindful state, but it is really just a state in which we have a habit of non-mindfulness, we could say. We have a habit of non-mindfulness in spaciness and sleepiness, but it is possible for mindfulness to kind of infuse that space, that quality of mind. And so, in that recognition of the spaciness, kind of a low energy space, the mind being very tired, I recognized that and just let it be there. And it lasted maybe 30 or 40 seconds. And then it was like the fog cleared. And then I was aware and the mind felt rested and it was back being with eating breakfast. So there are different, I think sometimes when we're, in states of low energy or low mindfulness, just connecting with what's the very easiest thing to connect with? Like, what is the least effortful thing to connect with in that moment? Maybe it's the breathing. Maybe it's just a state of resting or relaxing. Maybe you can just be aware of resting or relaxing in the body there. So there's a lot to potentially explore there. And then the question about noticing all the time and how your mind gets hooked. Well, the words are, so the question from that was sent to the panelists, the host and panelists. It sounds very tiring to be noticing all the time where and how your mind gets hooked. How can you do this in a relaxing way? So yes, the description in a way sounds pretty complicated. The words it takes to describe this, it's a lot of words, but the experience can be really simple. So you're simply just being curious about this experience of being mindful, and then in a very simple way. So, there can be a reflection time, maybe at a particular end of the day or something, where you're curious about where does my mind tend to get hooked during the day? Okay, I noticed that it really got lost when I was having that conversation with the friend, or I noticed it gets lost when I go to the grocery store. And then that's just a little bit of a spurring or an impetus. Put a reminder for yourself. When I go to the grocery store, I'm going to um, try to notice what happens. And again, a really light touch. I like to encourage a very relaxed kind of mindfulness, just the noticing what's obvious, especially in daily life, and having a sense of curiosity, or maybe it's more intention in a way. I'd like to be curious. I'd like to be curious about how the mind gets hooked. But we're not looking for it. We're not trying to track everything. We're not trying. That's exhausting. Yes, that is exhausting. But it's more just like, okay, I'd like to see if I can notice what happens. Where does the mind get hooked? And then, then you go about your day, and maybe that intention will support you to have that kind of waking up. Oh, I see. Here's where the mind gets hooked. And so again, it's an effortless recognition, perhaps, that you see in the grocery store, that the mind is getting hooked when you see how a mother and child are interacting. It's not something that you're having to track and do. And so it is, the relaxation is crucial. It's a crucial part of this mindfulness practice, is that there be a relaxation of mind. And so it's more kind of helping your mind to remember. And it may be just through setting of intention regularly through the day, whenever you notice, whenever you remember, oh, I'm back again, I'm aware. Like when I did that impatience reflection, whenever I noticed that the mindfulness returned, it's kind of like, okay, I am interested in, here's the mindfulness is back. And, kind of reconnecting with that intention to be curious about when impatience happens. And then as that happened, as I kind of set that intention, the awareness began to arise in relationship to the impatience very effortlessly. It just would show up. And so it doesn't take a lot of effort, but the trying to track it, trying to catch it, that idea of having to try to catch it, that does take effort. And I would just encourage it be more of an intention than an efforting to try to find it. So there were a few more questions. Oh, a whole bunch more questions, but I'm sorry I can't get to those. And Marjolein wanted to say something at the end here.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. This was really wonderful and insightful. Really enjoyed the meditation and the talk. And I just wanted to mention that all the teachers, including Andrea and the facilitators here at 30 Now, they share their dharma and their time and their knowledge and experience on a dana basis, which means uh, based on donation. And so the teachers and the facilitators are not financially compensated. And so even if you have a membership, you're contributing to 30 Now as a platform, but not to the teachers directly. So you are very welcome to offer a donation for the teachers' teachings. It's about giving something that makes you happy and that helps you appreciate the teachings. And so I'll put a link in the chat if you want to contribute to the donation, and very much appreciated. And I see many more thank yous coming in, and a little hands like that. So it's wonderful to see that it's been enjoyed, this talk. And so we'll close the room now. And so goodbye. I don't know if you want to say goodbye, Andrea.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Nice to see you
Bye.
all, or be with you all.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.